Actually, perimenopause can start in the late 30s. Menopause can actually mimic the symptoms that we associate with Alzheimer's disease or dementia. We like to say that menopause is like a renovation project on the brain.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think what women were told for many years is that hormone therapy could cause cancer. And that is an overstatement.
There are so many stereotypes of women going through menopause. If you want to disrespect a woman or you're a female boss, all you have to say is that she's probably going through menopause.
After getting older, being a woman is the most significant risk factor for developing Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is a disease of midlife with symptoms that start in old age.
Oh my goodness.
Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we have a very special guest with us today. Her name is Dr. Lisa Mosconi, and she's the writer of this book, The Menopause Brain. New science empowers women to navigate the pivotal transition with knowledge and confidence. And I wish I had this book before I started perimenopause, because many of you know I experienced so many symptoms or illnesses, if you will, and I was so uncomfortable so many years, and I did not know why. I went to see all different doctors, all different specialists, and nobody told me it might be related to menopause. So thank you for coming, Dr. Mosconi.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Your book is wonderful because it talks about what happens to our brain during this very special, significant period in our lives.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you define menopause and what the changes are in the brain for us? Because I know we always just talk about the symptoms. First is the hot flashes and maybe insomnia, but a lot of people weren't aware of other problems that I had. For example, digestive problems, vertigo, frozen shoulder, weight gain, and all sorts of other symptoms are all related to menopause. And we always just think, oh, it's because our uterus, ovaries aren't working anymore. But you really talk about it's the changes in our brain. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
So, as a society, we associate menopause with the function of the ovaries. Most women are aware that at some point in their lives, they will no longer have a menstrual cycle, and that means being in menopause. But what we're not really familiar with as the female population is the constellation of symptoms and changes that menopause can bring about. And when women say that they're having hot flashes, night sweats, insomnia, which you mentioned, depression, anxiety, rage, memory lapses, feeling like suddenly you have ADHD, brain fog, those are all possible symptoms of menopause, which so many women are just not familiar with. And when they do happen, it feels like you've been hit by a train and you don't know what's happening to you, which may lead to amplifying of the anxiety and the fear and the worry and the sleeplessness and the low mood. So it's even a vicious circle that can kind of start around that time in a woman's life. And number two, the reason I wrote the book is that so many women just did not link those symptoms with their brains. I mean, it's intuitive, obviously, if you're feeling sad, if you're experiencing tearfulness or anxiety or stress, irritability, brain fog, you know intuitively that that's coming from your brain. But there's no obvious intuitive connection with menopause, right? For so many years, for centuries, the connection between menopause and brain health has been understudied, right? Overlooked, but mostly not discussed. We all go through puberty at some point in our lives, and there is a very clear understanding that you may be in a bad mood, right? Most teenagers, we just acknowledge that that's going to be a rough couple of years, possibly. We are aware that you may be spacey. We may be aware that your emotions may be a little bit, running high and then running low. So there's a clear connection that we learned about since a very young age between puberty hormones and brain health and mental health. And then, for some women, pregnancy is another phase where our brains almost may feel like they have been hijacked by our hormones, right? For some women experience postpartum depression. Some women have the baby blues. Some women have the mommy brain, right? Like brain fog and whatnot. There you go. There you go. Well, see, we need to talk about that because there's this concept of hormonal sensitivity that is never discussed with us as women. But what we as scientists are learning more and more about, and what we're studying very actively at this point, is this concept of hormonal sensitivity. There are some women who are more sensitive to changes in their hormonal concentration, quality, quantity, frequency, how often the cycle is happening or not. And that reveals itself in multiple turning points in a woman's life. The first turning point, the first of the three P's, right, is puberty. Then we have pregnancy, and then we have perimenopause, but also there is premenstrual changes that some women may be quite sensitive to, right? So if you experience more serious changes at puberty, you're more likely to also experience them at pregnancy. And then you're more likely to experience them again as you go through menopause. And that's really important to know because that way you are prepared and you understand yourself better.
Right. I think being prepared is so important because
Yeah.
I was not. I think I started perimenopause, I'd like to say early 40s, perhaps even earlier, because I was not aware. I saw so many specialists. I started not being able to sleep. And as we all know, when you don't sleep well, you're in a bad mood. In your bad mood, you're tired. So then you don't exercise because you're too exhausted.
Get exhausted.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the first part that you talked about. It's a vicious cycle because
Yes.
you're already going through mood swings, right? Your hormones are swinging back and forth, and you're feeling sick. It's not sick. It's just
Yeah.
so
It's feeling
many
unwell,
unwell, that
right? You're
discomfort.
unwell, the discomfort, and so many women report this sentence, which this phrase is now very popular in the United States, like not feeling like yourself.
Absolutely. That's just perfect. And that frozen shoulder, like all of a sudden you can't move certain parts of
Yeah.
your body, or you get out of bed and you start hearing sounds. You're like, what's happening? I'm fairly young.
Yeah.
I'm only in my 40s. What's going on? And it's only until after I've hit menopause that I saw some research, and all of a sudden it clicked. Like
Yeah.
everything I went through was because of my hormone changes. And so you're absolutely right. There's not a whole lot of research, especially when I was going through it.
Yeah.
And I'm so thankful for you and other doctors who have stepped up and really talked about this openly and written books so that we understand. And you talk about the three P's in your book as well. And I think it's so interesting because puberty, everyone accepts. Like you're going through puberty, you're acting out, but puberty applies to both genders or
Yes,
applies
but
to everyone.
it does, but it's different for women because
Right.
in some ways, because that is the start of a menstrual cycle. And having a menstrual cycle is no picnic.
No.
And I don't mean it in a practical way. I mean it in a physiological way. Like
Right.
you need to, your body and your brain are both changing every month, actually on a weekly basis. And I think it's so important for all women and girls to really be aware that every time your ovaries cycle, your brain microcycles. All the changes, yes, all the changes in hormonal concentration are reflected in some functionalities and parameters inside the brain. We can see that, and there are many preclinical studies showing that, for instance, estradiol, which is the most potent form of estrogen. Estradiol is a very key hormone for brain health. And we literally, I mean, these are microscopic changes, right? What happens is when estradiol is high is that your neurons basically extend their dendritic branches. They kind of branch out and they're more connected to each other. It's almost like plants blooming in a way.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's very beautiful.
That is interesting.
Yes, and when estradiol recedes, right, in the second half of the menstrual cycle, closer to menstruation, the little branches actually recede. So you can see how estrogen has a neurotrophic functionality. It feeds your neurons in some ways. And you can see it. It's really like the blooming of a flower that then kind of like withdraws a little bit and then it blooms again and withdraws. These hormones that we have labeled as sex hormones in the 1930s are actually brain hormones too. So what happened is that in the 1930s, scientists that were studying reproductive function were able to isolate what we now call sex hormones, testosterone, estrone, another form of estrogen, then estradiol, progesterone, all the different sex hormones. And because they were studying reproductive function, they were like, oh, these are sex hormones. But it took until the 1990s, believe it or not, for scientists to realize, and this is Dr. Bruce McHugh at Rockefeller University right next door to us, they realized that those same hormones that were effectively key for reproduction were also just as important for the functioning of our minds. And estrogen in particular is referred to as the master regulator of women's brain health because in the brain, it serves a number of functions that have nothing to do with reproduction. It's also involved in reproductive function, of course, which originates effectively in the brain, not in the ovaries. But at the same time, it's neuroprotective. It protects your brain from harm. It's neurotrophic. It supports, almost it nourishes your neurons in some way, supports cellular mechanisms that are nourishing for neurons. It reduces inflammation. It's an anti-inflammatory hormone. It's an antioxidant hormone. It supports blood flow to the brain, which is very important because that's the way that the brain gets oxygen and nutrients, and you need to have a healthy circulation for the brain to really work effectively. And perhaps even most importantly, it promotes energy inside of the brain. At the cellular level, estrogen it attaches itself to neuronal membranes and even goes inside the nucleus of the cell and supports energy metabolism, which is the process by which mitochondria, these little parts of the cell, take glucose or other substrates and turn them into energy, in ATP. And I think this is so fascinating because so many women report, like you were saying before, exhaustion, fatigue.
So tired.
Yes. And sure enough, what we and others have shown is that the rate at which the brain is able to produce energy is actually lower in women who are postmenopausal and perimenopausal as compared to women who are premenopausal. And now we see that also over time in the same woman. So I feel like a lot of our work and other people's work has really been about almost validating what women have been saying for thousands of years, right?
Yes.
It's not
Yes.
just that I can't have kids at this point in my life, is that this is a mind body experience. Like any woman, many women will tell you, I have a different brain. Something has changed. And sure enough, we find that that is reflected in what we see with brain scans, with biological markers now, with proteomics. With all different approaches, we're getting a better grasp on the molecular changes that can take place as a woman goes through menopause. And I want to be absolutely clear here that the experience of menopause is very different from person to person. Not you, but there are some women who don't feel any changes other than their menstrual
Good
cycle.
for them, yeah.
Good for them.
Yeah.
Those are the lucky few, honestly. Is less than 10%, closer to 5% than the population, depending on different statistics.
Right.
But then at the other end of the spectrum, there's the unlucky few, the other 10% who have every symptom imaginable, and they need support, they need help. And then there's every woman in between where there's a range of symptoms, different kinds of symptoms, different constellations, if you will, different clusters of symptoms with different intensities, different frequency, different severity. So it's more like a syndrome, which is not the right word, but you know what I mean. It's not a one size fits all experience.
It's a spectrum, right?
It's
Spectrum symptoms. I absolutely agree with you. And up until I hit menopause, I thought I had no symptoms because I only realized I thought symptoms were just hot flashes. I thought that was it. So I thought I was the lucky few who never experienced any symptoms. Like I wasn't hot and cold and, I was fine. Until later on, I realized, oh, all that inflammation, like in my shoulder, digestive problems, everything was related. But at the time, I really thought I was the lucky few. I thought I was the lucky 10%, just because I didn't have hot flushes. So I think it's important for women, just like you said, there are so many symptoms. And when you explain the brain, you realize, well, you're tired. Because, for women our age, we have younger kids or kids who haven't hit their teenage years. We've got parents, we have family and career. So you assume you're tired because of this. And when you have insomnia, people just tell you you think too much, right? So for a lot of women, they go through the whole process thinking nothing's wrong. I don't really need menopausal support. I simply have digestive problem or frozen shoulder or whatever it is. So I think it's so important for women to see how everything's related. Like what you said, what's going on in your brain that's causing all of this. Because if estrogen and all that sex hormones, they're not just for your sex organs or for your fertility, it's for everything else, then you start to realize my whole body's affected. It's not just that I don't get my period anymore.
Can we talk about the neuroendocrine system?
Absolutely.
So I think I find this so bizarre. We go to school and we learn all these things that never really quite apply to your daily life.
Absolutely.
And then you need to kind of figure out the information that's actually relevant to you. But so I think
So for
thank
everyone, it's
you.
on page 73 in your version.
So women or individuals who are born with two X chromosomes are born with a neuroendocrine system, which is a very important anatomical and functional pathway inside the body. It's one of the major pathways inside our bodies that connects the brain, like in the figure you were showing, it connects the brain to the ovaries through multiple nodes along the way. So there's the pancreas, there's the thymus, there's the pituitary gland. There are many different stops along this very important highway or subway. I describe it as a subway in the book. And also each one of these nodes or stops has further connections with other parts of the body. So hormones are not just local. They're being made, some sex hormones are made by the ovaries and right all the way up to the brain. And some hormones are made in response by the brain and they go down the highway back to the ovary. So ovaries and brain are constantly communicating every day of our lives as women. And that has consequences because when these hormones start to speak different languages, if you will, right, the ovaries are like, okay, I'm done, I'm out, I'm closing down shop. The brain will ramp up production of hormones like FSH or LH, the luteinizing hormone, the follicular stimulating hormone that go back to the ovaries and no, I need more, I need more. And this kind of almost compromised communication system that has an effect everywhere in the body. And you mentioned digestive issues. For some women, it's the irregular heart rate, palpitations. For some women, it's the hot sweats in the night, the hot flashes in the night sweats. But also what I think is so important is to appreciate that there's almost like the brain almost contains the anatomy of menopause. So there are some parts of the brain that are more sensitive to changes in hormonal concentration. And these are very specific and they really help understand the symptoms. So the neuroendocrine system goes up into the brain, and the first part that hits is called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, it's a very tiny part structure in the brain that has a lot of really important functionalities, including regulating temperature everywhere in the body. So this structure needs hormones to be at stable concentrations to work effectively. If the hormones are fluttering, they're fluctuating up and down or are missing, then this structure may misfire. And that means that the rest of the brain is also kind of a little bit in a jam. And the result is that the brain cannot regulate body temperature correctly. And that's why we get the hot flashes and the night sweat. Then there's another structure. Well, the pituitary gland is right there as well. And that will have different functionalities that are more digestion and more like almost autonomic nervous system in nature. But then down here, there's a structure called the brainstem that is also really rich in estrogen receptors. So it's very sensitive to changes in hormone concentrations. And that's where the sleep centers are. Yes. So same principle, consistent hormones, night and wake cycles are regulated. If hormones become inconsistent, then a sleep and wake cycle will be disturbed. And if you hit hypothalamus and brainstem at the same time, you get the night sweats, which are hot flashes at night. And then we had the medial temporal lobes, hippocampus, amygdala, the memory center of the brain, the emotional fear regulating center of the brain. Same principle. If hormones are giving mixed messages, these structures may be altered in their functionality, and then memory consolidation may not happen as well. Emotional regulation may not happen as well. And same for the frontal cortex, which is in charge of thinking and reasoning. That part of the brain is also very rich in estrogen receptors, and therefore it will be impacted by fluctuations in hormone concentrations, which means the brain fog. And even like, the word fumbles when so many women just can't come up with words. Yes, it's very common. Right. Exactly. So that makes sense if you think about all the different parts of the brain that are impacted specifically by menopause and what their functionality is when hormones are stable.
Right.
And just imagine, okay, so this is why I'm having this symptom and that symptom.
Yeah.
Doesn't make you feel any better to know, but it helps to feel like this is not some kind of weird alien process that's taking over my mind. There's a rational explanation that is important to know so that we don't feel like there's something wrong with us. Or
Yeah,
like I'm losing my mind. So many women are coming to us because like I'm losing my mind. I'm getting dementia. And we're like, okay, let's take a step back. Let's do all the tests and see what's happening because menopause can actually mimic the symptoms that we associate with Alzheimer's disease or dementia.
Uh, yeah, I'd love to talk more about that.
Mhm.
Definitely about menopause and possible correlation, how it's correlated to Alzheimer's and how women are more likely to get Alzheimer's a little later on. But what you were saying, though, chapter one, you're not
Mhm.
crazy, which is
Yeah.
so aptly named. You are not crazy. And I think so many of us need to hear it. And you said, well, even if you do know, it doesn't make it better. But I think on some levels it does because you
Yeah.
realize you are not crazy. Like everything that you think, like, what's wrong with me? Like, why is nothing working in my
Yeah.
body? I mean, it's
Yeah.
functional, but it's not really working well. I think women all need to know we're not crazy.
Yeah.
And I like to dive into the gender issue a little bit. We talked about how we all change during puberty, even though women or little girls are a little different. But I think people generally accept, okay, teenagers, right, going through puberties will act out. There's a lot of tolerance or understanding about that phase. And during
Mhm.
pregnancy, like you said in the book, it's a blessing event. So people are also more tolerant or respectful of pregnant women being
Yes.
forgetful or whatnot. But when it comes to menopause, that's a different story
Yeah.
because then you're just a midlife woman who's moody all the time. And so there are so many stereotypes of women going through menopause. And so for a long time, especially when I was growing up, if you want to disrespect a woman or your boss, female boss, all you have to say is that she's probably going through menopause. And that in and of itself, it's almost a disrespect way of describing someone. So let's talk about the gender issue. What happens to women's brains during these three stages? You talk about the
Mhm.
similarities in brain scans. And why is that, you think, women would go through this period? I mean, there's got to be something good that comes out of this, right? Because
Yes.
we go through this biological evolution. It just sounds like it's so unfair.
Yes.
But let's first talk about the gender issue. You describe in your book there are a lot of words that came from
Greek.
that
Yes.
Greek roots, right? Like uterus,
Uterus.
hysteria. Can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about the history, what we went through? And I think women nowadays are so lucky because of you and other doctors who exist to promote the understanding of menopause. But let's talk about what women have gone through in the past when they hit menopause.
Yes. Well, so in the past, we go all the way back to ancient Greece, where some physicians like Hippocrates and philosophers actually had a saying about menopause, but mostly women of postmenopausal age or menopausal age were not really the subject of great attention. Well, they knew what they thought, or they realized was that there was a connection between puberty and menopause, right? Where puberty is the onset of menstruation, menopause is the end of menstruation. But what they thought is that both were actually a really bad thing for women.
Mm,
And, for centuries to thousands of years, people saw menstruation as something really, really scary and something that you just want to keep private to yourself, right? Nobody really wants to talk about it. But there was this notion of the wandering womb. Like almost,
mm,
they actually believed that the womb of a woman would basically migrate from the lower abdomen all the way up to her neck and throat to strangulate a woman and produce the signs of hysteria. Certain times in a woman's life, one of those being menopause. Because,
mm,
however, there was an understanding and recognition that some women had a legitimate hard time going through menopause. The symptoms may have been severe, more or less severe, but there was a notion that women kind of became almost hysterical at certain times in their reproductive life. Then we fast forward to
But
more.
let's talk about
Yeah.
hysteria a little bit more, because let's think of the context of what women had to go through, wearing corsets, I mean, not having rights, living a
Yeah,
very oppressive patriarchal society. And
absolutely. And
so
even the fact that the word hysteria or craziness comes from uterus, right? There was
crazy.
taken to refer to something completely out of control, something that, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of negative connotations in general that have been applied to women just by virtue of us having a reproductive system. And menopause in particular has been treated with everything from opium to prayers to hysterectomies, right? In Victorian England, women who were suffering from symptoms of menopause were actually subjected to surgery. And they would remove their ovaries and uterus, trying to make things better, without realizing that if you plunge a woman in menopause, actually the symptoms may be worse.
Worse.
So yeah, I mean, it's not easy being women. I
It's
think,
not.
yeah,
And it just
better
shows
now.
that, it just shows that our medical
Yes,
evolution is really based on the male perspective,
yes, for sure.
and not really females, and even till this day. And I remember Dr. Mary Haver talked about WW, whining women, as what, when she was a practitioner, or she was a young doctor, she's heard older male doctors say, oh, here's a case of WW, which is whining women again. So that's only maybe a decade or two ago, right? So I think it's so important that we remove the stigma of
Yeah.
menopause. And so for people to help understand what women are going through during this phase of their lives. You have shown brain scans in your TED Talk. Can you talk just a little bit about what they may look like?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's hard to believe that my TED Talk was in 2019. And when I did that, so many people were absolutely shocked because this connection between menopause and brain health is something that every woman under the sun has thought about. But the notion that there was actual science looking into that was really, I think it was a relief for many women, but at the same time was also a reason for concern. So I'm glad that we've had years since to talk about what the science means and doesn't mean. So back in 2017, so I've been working on women's brain health since college. It was always,
Yay.
yes, yeah, it's been a minute. It's been a minute. And for the vast majority of my career, nobody could care less. It was really not a priority for anyone to do this kind of research. But I was working in Alzheimer's disease because, and I know we're going to talk about this later, I'm just going to anticipate
Yes.
this for a second. Alzheimer's affects more women than men. So we were looking at whether being a woman could be a trigger for Alzheimer's, and if so, how? And I have done every study that I could think about. I've done genetics, I've done lifestyle, I've done medical history. We've done all sorts of things. And eventually, we started looking at menopause as a potential risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, at least for some women. And I had no idea that that was actually news for many people in my field. And what we did together with Dr. Roberta Diaz-Brinton, who is a mentor and really good friend of mine, and she has been doing this way longer than I have. And so we started doing brain imaging studies of, at first, we were looking at women at different stages of menopause. So women who were premenopausal, regular menstrual cycle, perimenopausal, irregular menstrual cycle, postmenopausal, no menstrual cycle for over a year.
Mm.
And then over time, we also started following women over time. You have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
So in 2017, we evidently published the first study that looked at women's brains before, during, and after menopause. And that's what I showed in my TED Talk. And we found quite a bit of differences. We found that women who were postmenopausal had reduced gray matter density in some parts of the brain, which is a sign that the neurons are not talking to each other as much. There may be a little bit of neuronal loss.
Mm.
And we found more red flags for Alzheimer's disease in the women who were postmenopausal, also relative to men of the same age. That was important. But mostly we showed that, and we talked about this before, energy levels in the brain were progressively lower in women at the premenopausal, perimenopausal, and postmenopausal stage. And these alterations in metabolic levels were quite specifically found in some of the same brain regions that are typically affected by Alzheimer's disease.
Mm.
And that's what we showed on the brain scans that went viral at that point. I still, to this day, there are people who just use their brain scans without even mentioning us, which is a total
Oh, that's
copyright
horrible.
violation.
Yeah,
It's
that's not good.
horrible. Yeah, it's
Not
incredible.
good.
Also, it's a violation of copyright. It can
Yeah.
be. I don't
So for the
mind, but
record, the brain scans came from Dr. Mosconi's work.
yeah,
So we're
from
going to
Weill
make
Cornell
sure,
Medicine at Weill
yeah.
Cornell, yes, Medicine in New York City, which, they own the copyright. You can't just use it as you want.
Right.
But it's fine. It's all good as long as women have access to the information and the information is used correctly, which sometimes is not the case. So just to clarify, those scans do not suggest or imply that women's brains are deficient or that women's brains are sick. What the brain scans show is that there is a change, right? That if your energy level was like this before menopause, now it's like this. Does it make sense? Yes, because estrogen is a hormone that gives you energy, supports brain energy. And when it withdraws, the brain responds by lowering energy metabolism. That does not mean that there's something wrong with your brain. It means that there's a change that helps us understand what women are reporting in terms of symptoms and memory changes, brain fog, and whatnot. So I just want to be clear. Nobody saying that women's brains are not good as we go through menopause. In fact, I just want to, point this out that if you measure cognitive performance in men and women of the same age, women consistently outperform men on cognitive testing before and after menopause. So
Thank
after
you.
menopause, yes, please, let's make sure that this is clear. On specific tests, especially memory, this is what we were measuring was memory, attention, and language. Women tend to do better than men before and after menopause, which means that a woman going through menopause with everything that can go on in her life and the symptoms and the insomnia and whatnot is still outperforming a man who's not going through menopause.
Thank you. I got very excited because you often hear this being used as an excuse for not putting women who are going through menopause on the
Yes.
stage or
Yeah.
being promoted or becoming president or whatever because they have that thing coming or they might be going through menopause. But yes,
Also,
so
just to clarify this too, obviously we're talking average, right? So some women do not outperform men and
yeah,
some men do outperform women,
right.
right?
I mean,
But
they're
it's important because the notion is that women just don't perform, period.
Right,
And
right,
that is
right.
not true.
Right. Well, I mean, there is always distributional overlap, right? Not
Yes, of
all
course.
women are shorter than men, but just on average, that even when women's brains change due to menopause, it does not affect their IQ per se.
Oh, absolutely. That definitely does not affect your IQ.
Right,
That is
right,
stable. What can be impacted is performance
right.
at specific times of the day, of the month, and that's why it's so important also to provide support for women in menopause also in the workplace, because, we're half of the population. The entire population is born from us.
Mm-hmm.
And we are at this point almost the majority of the workforce, at least here in the United States. So women of menopausal age are actually the fastest growing sector of the population.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that all women have the support that they need
Yeah.
to perform as well as they can.
I think United States and in most developing countries, that's becoming the case. So
It is
so that's why I wanted to
England, Australia.
urge my audience, even if you're not going through menopause and even if you're a man, you should understand it because most likely you will be working. You are going to be surrounded by a lot of
Yes.
women going through perimenopause and menopause. So you need to understand what is happening without that kind of judgment or dismissal because it's something that's happening in your body and it's very uncomfortable. I personally, like I said, didn't experience hot flashes. So I can't imagine just some of my friends saying in the middle of a room in a meeting, you just start to heat up and you feel like steam is coming out of your head.
Did you see that clip of that lady?
In the
She
football
had a-
field?
yes. Oh my God. And this steam that's literally coming out of her head.
Because I have
That,
so many people forwarding that to me saying,
yeah.
that's how I feel. And I feel horrible, but at the same time, I experience brain fog. Like I will be talking in the middle of my speech. I'd forget a word. And
Mhm.
usually I do Chinglish. So if I can't think of it in Chinese, I'll think of it in English
Mhm.
and then give myself some time to say, what's a word in Chinese or what's that word in English? There were times where I just stood there thinking, what,
Mhm.
what am I saying?
Like
And
the symbol when your computer gets stuck and there's the beach ball that's spinning.
that's exactly it. So there are times where
Mm.
I realize I talk slower now because I want to make sure the words
That's
are
smart.
coming out. And I give myself the grace of just being silent, like give myself time to think. Because then you get nervous and you
Yes.
start to sweat and then you forget like even whatever you were talking about at all.
Yeah.
So I've had experience of that. But I will say, ever since I've gotten the support that I need, it has gotten a lot better. So that moves on to the next question.
Mhm.
The symptoms that you experience while your brain is going through changes, does that recover? And what can we do to
Mhm.
help prevent it or help recover it, whatever it is?
So menopause is a transition. It's really important to see it that way because, like puberty, like pregnancy, these are neuroendocrine transitions that start and have an end. So, what clinical studies have shown is that typically the symptoms of menopause tend to start a few years before the final menstrual period, and then they tend to dissipate or go away progressively over time, starting 2 years after the final menstrual period, with a limit of about 6 years after the final menstrual period, which is a lot of time, but that's the range. Typically, is 2 years before, 2 years after the final menstrual period. So
Mm,
the idea, based on that and on new research that we and others have been doing, is that the brain has the ability to overcome, if you will, menopause, just to adjust and kind of reset itself to a different baseline and then just keep going.
Mm.
We like to say that menopause is like a renovation project on the brain.
Renovation
And
project. That's awesome.
yeah, it's like the brain rewires itself. And I think this is important to appreciate. So what happens in puberty, which is well documented, is that the brain rewires itself to basically give more power in a way to some of the brain regions that are important for maturation, like the frontal cortex becomes really, really well connected. That means that some neuronal connections are actually shed. In
You
fact,
talked about that. Our
I
brains
did
get
talk about that.
smaller.
Again, well, we lose half of all the neurons that we have in our heads as we go through puberty. But that is thought to be a good thing because if you're a brain, you're very metabolically expensive, you're very complicated, very hard to maintain. So if you can obtain the same level of functionality and performance with fewer neurons, that's actually very smart. You don't need that many resources to do the same thing. You just need to be wired really well. And that's what seems to happen at puberty. So we have the downsides, we have the feisty emotions, we have, the sudden change of heart, we have the you're moody, we have the you're spacey. But that's because your brain is changing to make sure that you can be a grown-up, a mature individual. So
Right.
all those neurons that you don't need anymore, like you know how to tie up your shoes, you know how to ride a bike, hopefully you know how to read and write. Those can go because now you can go on autopilot. Why am I saying this? Because something similar happens in pregnancy. In pregnancy, once again, there is a rewiring of the brain's connectivity that this time takes less from the frontal cortex and goes back into the primitive parts of your brain. The amygdala. You need to be ready
Interesting.
for anything. Let me tell you, right? As a new mom, you literally have to start reading minds because your little one can't speak and depends on you 100% for the next several years. So you need to go back and tap more into your primitive parts of the brain. And that comes with the rewiring another time. You lose some neurons, you make some connections stronger, and then you may have the baby blues. Maybe you have the depressive symptoms. Maybe you have the brain fog. But when you're done, your brain is ready for you to be a mother. You're almost superhuman. I have great respect for mothers. For me, pregnancy completely changed my brain. Let me tell you, I can feel it. So there's a downside, but there's an upside. And the same thing, I strongly believe, happens in menopause. The brain is rewiring itself because at this point, you no longer need to carry a pregnancy, to give birth to a baby, and you don't need to raise that child from scratch. So all those neurons, especially neurons that were so important for menstruation, for hosting a pregnancy, all that functionality is cued by the brain.
Yeah.
All those neurons can go. So I think that's what's happening, that the brain is rewiring itself and we see the changes. We see that the volume is a little bit smaller, perhaps energy is a little bit lower, but that's because you don't need that much gray matter, I
Right,
guess,
right,
right? At
right.
least at that kind of dosage. And it's rewiring, so you get the glitches, you get the downsides, you get the
Right.
brain, you may have the brain fog, the mood changes, changes in libido, changes in sleep. But at the end of the day, I really believe the brain is better equipped to carry you as a woman into the next phase of your life, which is not reproductive and more intellectual.
Yeah, I absolutely love that because when we talk about menopause, I had interviewed a doctor locally and we did a deep dive on menopause and we had received so many texts and a lot of it was complaint or just sad acceptance that such as women's lives, like How come it gets worse and worse, right? And so I did really want to talk about the benefit we might
Yeah.
experience from menopause. But before that, I want to go back to pregnancy. I loved what you said of how it's a rewiring of our brain. What you said was less in the prefrontal cortex and moving
Mhm.
more towards the instinctive limbic part.
Yeah.
And that's amazing because I have 3 kids, and I
Oh,
do
God.
think that every time you have a kid, and I had considered myself quite a logical, not a very emotional person,
Mhm.
but I can see how that pregnancy really does rewire your brain. Like you become less logical because
I think it's not less, I think you're still logical, but you need to allow yourself to be more instinctual because
yeah, I mean,
there's some things you can't do purely out of logic. You need to be connected with that little
absolutely.
one on a deeper,
On a
more
deeper
primitive
level,
level.
right? Right.
Yeah.
I remember when my firstborn, after my firstborn, I was crying a whole lot. And I
Mm.
think partly maybe is postpartum depression, but
Change.
just never felt like I could love anyone this much. And that the illogical came from like what if something happens to me? What if something happens to her? And all of the things that I think before pregnancy, I would have never thought was these are statistically unlikely. You
Yeah.
just become crazy worry. And I see how my brain changed. And I also see how it changed again after menopause because
Yeah.
for a long time you are just so focused on the kids. Are you going to be okay? Did you bring this to school? Are you going to get
You brush
hurt?
your teeth.
And then you go through menopause. It's like you're all grown ups. You can take care of yourself because mommy's just tired. I don't have time to think
Yeah,
about this.
and the question is always what is biology and what is culture, what is life,
Right,
right? What
right,
is
right.
situational and what is actually genetic or biological. But these are very good points, and I think so many women can relate. And at that point, I think once you accept that this may happen, right? Then the question is, well, how do I support my body, my brain, and my mind as
Mm-hmm.
I go through menopause? Because for so many years, the idea is that you just suffer. You know, you just soldier
Yeah,
on, figure it out, just keep going
yeah,
and suck it up. That was
yeah,
really the message. But now we have so many more resources and so much
yeah.
more information that I think it's really important for all women to be aware that we are not alone,
Right,
right? There is
right,
support, there is care available.
right,
And as we get to learn how our bodies work more and more, then we can tailor specific treatments or specific adjustments to our own specific biology and risks and needs. Now,
right,
anything from lifestyle to environmental choices to medical support to mindset. There are so many things that are important for women to be aware of, that those actually do play a role, and
mm-hmm.
that many are on the table, like hormone therapy.
Yeah,
For so many years, women were actively almost discouraged from
yeah,
using hormone therapy, whereas now, with all the new research that we have and the change in guidelines and regulations, it is now finally accessible. Not because
yeah,
it wasn't accessible before, but women are now more encouraged
yeah.
to use it if appropriate.
Right. And you talk about that in the book, and I do want to mention this again. And because the last video that we recorded, there were still a lot of messages about concerns about hormone therapy
Mhm.
and the research that was done years ago
Yeah,
on
yeah.
older women who've already been through menopause. That research had brainwashed the
That
last
unfortunate.
generation. And
Yeah,
it's till this day people are like I don't want to try
yeah,
anything else, anything herbal or
Yeah.
just the resistance is still there. So
Yeah.
I love that you were very clear in your book about the research. And I understand hormone therapy, replacement therapy is not for everyone. But I do think consult your doctor and just try it, right? Don't say no. I personally have all sorts of, you know, um, I've got the estradiol that I put on my body, and I have the progesterone. And I must say, I'm not endorsing the products or anything, but it really did help me.
Mhm.
So I just want to say it's not a direct correlation, and I know Dr. Mosconi can attest to that as well. There's no direct correlation to cancer. And
I think what women were told for many years is that hormone therapy could cause cancer. And that is an overstatement
mhm,
of the findings from specific clinical trials. So I think in this case, it's really important to have an informed conversation with a menopause specialist who's also up to speed with the research. So one long story short, there's this massive clinical trial, the Women's Health Initiative, that started in the 1990s. Now, this is a while ago. And they started the study. Thank goodness they did it, but they started before scientists have fully studied how estrogen functioned in the brain or the heart or other parts of the brain. So the understanding of estrogen action and progesterone was still quite, it still needed a lot more work, right?
mm,
But amazing that they did a fantastic clinical trial, the largest in women's health, that unfortunately came to an end in 2002, 2003, because yes, there was a reduction in hot flashes, which was expected, but what they were trying to do was prevent cardiovascular disease and dementia. And
mm,
they had, each clinical trial had two arms. For women with a uterus, then the therapy was oral conjugated equine estrogens
mm,
with a synthetic progestin called MPA. For women without a uterus, then they would only take the oral conjugated equine estrogens without the progesterone, because
mm,
if you don't have a uterus, there is no concern of uterine cancer with estrogen alone there.
mm,
Now, progesterone can be used for other things as well, but in that study, they had women with a uterus, estrogen, progestin, women without a uterus, estrogen only. Now, it's important to understand that estrogen therapy is an umbrella term for many different formulations, right? The one tested in the study was very specific, was oral conjugated equine estrogens at high doses. We
mm,
don't use that anymore today.
mm,
So that's important to know. We especially don't use the MPA. We still use the conjugated equine estrogens, but not at that higher dose.
mm,
The doses are lower today. And the MPA, the progestin, is no longer, has been discontinued, at least in the United States.
mhm,
So in that trial, what they found is that the group of women with the uterus taking oral CEEs and MPAs had a higher risk of cardiovascular disease events and
mm,
also of dementia relative to placebo. They
mm,
also experienced a higher rate of breast cancer, just by a little bit, but it was
mm,
higher. Now, what's interesting is that the women in the estrogen only study did not show harmful effects.
mm,
The rate of breast cancer was lower than in placebo, and
mm,
they did not show more cardiovascular
mm,
insults or higher rates of dementia, at least not significantly. So
mm,
that suggested that maybe the progestin was the problem.
mm.
And now, long story short, that specific kind of progestin is no longer
We're no
part
longer
of the
using that.
treatment plan. We're
Yeah.
no longer using it. Now, over time, different types of estrogens have been made more available and they're more widely utilized, like the one that you have right
Mm-hmm.
now. which is estradiol,
Mm-hmm.
17-beta estradiol. That specific type of hormone, especially you said you put it through the skin, right? It's transdermal, like the patch
Yes.
or
Yeah.
the gel. Yeah. That has never been linked with a higher risk of heart disease or dementia.
Mm.
So that is very important information to have. Now, the other part of the equation, or breast cancer, although that needs to be really, really better looked at, but what the guidelines say, professional guidelines, and I think it's really important to know that those are the most conservative takes on the topic. So if professional societies say this is safe, it means it's safe because they have jumped every hoop to make sure that their statement is as accurate as it can be. And these days, professional societies internationally have revised their position, and the new guideline is that for women who are eligible for hormone therapy, the benefits typically outweigh the risks.
Mm-hmm.
And for your audience and for all audiences, and please go look it up online. Don't take my word for this, just read it. It's available, it's free to download, it's a PDF. What they say is that the risk of breast cancer is not zero, but is considered a rare occurrence.
Mm-hmm.
And what's important is to put it in context. So the risk of breast cancer associated with hormone, associated with, not caused by,
Mm-hmm.
associated with hormone therapy is actually a little bit lower than the risk of breast cancer that comes from drinking 2 glasses of wine per day.
That's a good,
You
that's
know,
a
that's important.
very
And
good
look,
comparison. Yeah.
yes, and it's not to say it's zero, right? We're not dismissing
Right.
the association, but it's not as dramatic as the
Right.
headlines made us believe for
Right.
decades. It's also significantly lower than just leading a sedentary life, or the risk of breast cancer associated with high breast density
Mm.
is 5 times higher than that of hormone therapy. You know what I mean? These are correlations, like you said before. Hormone therapy does not trigger a cancer.
Right.
What can happen is that if you don't know that you have cancer cells,
Mm-hmm.
and you put estrogen in there, estrogen makes everything grow. You know, so that's why it's so important to do mammograms and screening, especially now with the three-dimensional mammograms that can really catch very, very early signs. Also with AI,
Right.
right? We're moving towards very, very early screening and detection. You
Right.
want to make sure if you have a family history or if you have a mutation, you want to make sure they're absolutely safe.
Yeah. So it's not over the counter, just go
No,
buy your estradiol. You do need to check with your
yeah,
physician to
absolutely.
understand, just like any other drug or
Yeah,
supplement that you take, you should consult a medical professional. But the idea that even when you're recommended this treatment, you say no just because of the myth or what your mother has told you. I just want to urge people to do your own research. Although
yeah.
do your own research right now is a
It's
little bit
not do your own
scary.
research. That is terrifying. I would say
That is
really
terrifying,
check.
especially what's
Yeah.
going on out there right
Mhm.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but look, we have professional societies
Mm-hmm.
and they review all the research, all the findings. They're very clear and very conservative. So I
Yeah.
think that is really the place to start.
Right.
Look at that first,
Right.
and then print it out, go to your doctor, and the
Mm-hmm.
question is hormone therapy the right treatment for me?
Mm-hmm.
It may not be. And now we have other options. Like for instance, now we have neurokinin inhibitors
Mm-hmm.
that are non-hormonal treatments that significantly reduce hot sweats. I keep saying hot sweats, hot flashes and night sweat. Yeah,
But I mean, you do in your book, I would really
yeah,
highly recommend everyone get this book. I believe women over the year of 30 should have this at home, just
Okay.
as a reference. And there, in the very beginning, it talks about what happened to you, right? What's happening in your body, what's happening in your brain, and talks about possible treatments and supplements. So let's talk about what can we do? What can we do now that we know, okay, I'm 35? Oh, one of the things I do want to share with you. So the
Mhm.
last video I recorded, we talked about, I think one of the title is like women over 35, be aware. Like you need to watch this because you need to be prepared. And there were some negative comments like this is promoting fear. Like women don't
Yeah,
go through menopause at this early young age. Um,
actually, perimenopause can start in the late 30s.
which is
Yeah.
why we said when you're 35, you should
You
have an
should, you
idea
should
of what
be,
what
yeah, you
might
should know.
happen.
You should
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree. We
yeah,
also do 35. 35, soon. Not to be scared about things, but just to know what may happen in the
exactly.
years to come and just be prepared and do your research and just learn even just how to talk about certain things because there's a chance your mom hasn't told you, right? Or
Or she
your
doesn't know.
friends don't know either. Maybe your mom doesn't know how to talk about
Yeah,
certain things. So I
yeah,
think it's very important to be prepared. And I always, do not fear your body. The whole point is to really understand how our bodies work, what they need to be at their best.
hmm,
And then it's up to us to really give back to our bodies. There's this notion, I think, because I'm a scientist and I'm always thinking about the inside, and the inner workings of the body and the mind. And I'm convinced that our bodies love us, not in an
love
emotional
that.
sense, but I really, really think every woman, your body loves you. Your body has been working tirelessly from the minute you were conceived to make sure that you could be the best version of yourself that you can
Right.
be, right? Your bodies are constantly trying to keep you healthy, to keep you safe. We need to give back. We need to learn how to take care of our bodies in return. And
Yeah.
it's nothing to do with fear, but really about love and just understanding and loving kindness and being compassionate. Sometimes we get so impatient with ourselves. Like we wish
Yeah.
that we were taller, we wish that we were skinnier, we wish that we were stronger, we wish that we were prettier, all this nonsense. And in the end, it's really about how blessed we are to be on this planet. And life is so precious and life is so fragile. And it's so important that we all learn how to take care of ourselves.
Yeah.
And, there's no plan B.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love what you said about our bodies are loving us. They're supporting
Yeah,
us. They're making sure that we can move. They're doing the rewiring so we can function better.
yeah.
So treat it
There's a plan.
like
There's a
there
plan.
there's a plan. It's a
Yes,
renovation. Like when
it's a
your house is
renovation.
under renovation, you can't live in it. Everything's a mess, but it's going to be beautiful after it's done. So let's talk about that beautiful phase
Yes.
after menopause, which
Mhm.
I'm at after menopause, and I will attest to this. I love my life right now. I
Oh,
love
good.
the fact that when we plan a vacation, to an island, I don't have to think about whether or not I need to bring my tampons or if I have my period. I
Yes.
love that because I get tired more easily. I can say no to things more firmly because I know my body can't handle it. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
when I was younger, I'd say, let's just tough it out. It's okay. I don't want to go, but I'll make myself go. But now I would just say, no, I need to take care of myself because I know I don't have as much energy. So, really prioritizing my life, which I should have done or I could have done. But, when you have the energy, you think you can spend it all. It's okay
Yeah.
to overextend yourself. So, I love that as well. So, what else is great about menopause? after our
So,
rewiring, after we shed all the unnecessary
yeah.
brain parts? What's good?
Well,
What's
I will
good
say
coming?
the research on this is not is limited. Let's put it that way. But the research that we do have, mostly from Europe, shows that life contentment may actually be higher after menopause than before. The studies that we do have, and I wish we had more, but the studies that we do have show that women consistently report more happiness or more contentment after menopause, and even higher than they themselves reported prior to
Mm.
menopause. And that, there's a lot of research showing that happiness almost follow a U shape,
Mm-hmm.
dips in midlife for a number of reasons, not just menopause, I would say, but then it tends to recuperate later on in life. And that seems to be consistent in those studies of postmenopausal women. So that's one thing to look forward to, obviously. If you feel more at ease with yourself, or if you feel better in your skin, that I think is a gift per se, whether it's
Absolutely.
cultural or behavioral or neurological, I'll take it. And the other part of research that's quite consistent is that empathy
Mm.
seems to increase after the transition to menopause. And actually, there are some studies showing that this rewiring that takes place in the brain, in puberty is more frontal, is more about being rational and being on top of things. Pregnancy goes back to the primitive parts of the brain. You need to be more reactive, more ready for everything, fight or flight. And
Mm-hmm.
the menopause is more even, is more
Mm.
equally distributed, and especially this highly reactive part of the brain that's called the amygdala. It's the emotional
Mm.
center and the fear-inducing center of the brain,
Mm.
has an interesting changing pattern, if you
Mm.
will, where negative emotions are downregulated, but
Mm.
positive emotions are sustained. And it's almost as if you don't pay as much attention to things that make you sad or upset, but you're able to maintain happiness and perhaps to protect happiness in a way.
Yes.
When people say you get wiser, I think that's part of the process, but there seems to be a neurobiological component to that menopause brings about. Yes, you are no longer reproductive,
Mm-hmm.
but you're still clearly productive. And in a way, perhaps you tell me, but more at peace.
I think so. I absolutely agree. I think you're triggered less because you've
Yeah.
been through so much. And at this point of your life, your body's been through so much as well. So
Also.
you look at certain things, you're like, it's not that big of a deal. I've been
Yeah,
through
don't sweat
worse.
the small stuff,
Yeah.
you know.
Don't sweat the
But
small
do you
stuff.
know that saying? I find it so funny. Like, if you feel like you're walking through hell, just act as if you own the place.
Yeah, walk like the boss, right?
Walk like a
Yeah.
boss,
I mean,
yeah.
I love that you said don't sweat the small stuff because you've sweat so much already. Like
Yeah.
you're done sweating
You're
and you're
done
just
sweating, that's
thinking,
it.
I am done. I don't need to sweat about this anymore. I do think there is a sense of peace. And in your book, you talk about, the grandma or the wise woman role
Yeah,
that serves in terms of our anthropological evolution. We do serve a role in the society, right? You're
yeah,
no longer seen as a sexual object, but you're not reproductive anymore, but you are productive.
yeah,
You are more articulate in terms of you talk about empathy, understanding, really the wise woman in the tribe
yeah.
type of role. And I do feel like that a little bit more. And I love that we don't remember as much because, man, when I used to fight with my husband, I could name every single
Huh.
thing, every single second. Like I have all the data to back up my argument. nowadays, first of all, you don't care as much. You think it's not a big deal. And secondly, you don't even remember. Like, did he really do it or did he not? I can't remember. So then forget
You're
it,
like,
right?
you
Yeah,
know,
it's fine. So I think that does also help in terms of your relationships, because there's no way every relationship is harmonious all the time. But
yeah,
if you constantly remember what everyone
yes,
has ever done, then you're never really at peace. So I
yeah,
think memory loss does serve its function as well. But speaking of memory, let's talk about Alzheimer's and dementia. We had mentioned a little bit before that in your book, you had talked about women are, for every two women who gets Alzheimer's, only one man, right?
yeah.
So the ratio is higher. Now, does this only apply to Alzheimer's or dementia in general?
Mm.
And can you talk about the correlation and or cause and effect?
You know, that's a really good question. So, dementia is an umbrella term that includes many different diseases. Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia, accounting for almost 70% of all cases.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the only form of dementia where women experience a higher proportion of patients than men, where the prevalence of the disorder is higher in women than in men.
Mm-hmm.
Vascular dementia, 50-50. Parkinson's disease with dementia, more common in men than in women. Frontotemporal dementia, more common in men to a little bit, just a slight degree. So there seems to be a connection between being born as a woman and the likelihood of developing Alzheimer's disease. And what we and others have noted, I was, again, in college, actually, I was doing my PhD when I was saying, well, I mean, we have known since the 1990s that after getting older, being a woman is the most significant risk factor for developing Alzheimer's. And people would say to me, and they still say to me 20 years later or more, they would say, well, look, Alzheimer's disease is a disease of old age, and women live longer than men. So at the end of the day, more women than men end up with Alzheimer's. But in reality, if you look at the numbers, women don't live that much longer than men. It's just a couple of years
Yeah.
difference. And if it was just aging, then women would also show a higher prevalence of vascular dementia, of frontotemporal dementia, Lewy body dementia, but we do not. It's only Alzheimer's. So long story short, we and others have been looking into this. We're looking into this now, especially. But there are quite a few factors that could explain the higher lifetime risk of dementia, of Alzheimer's disease for women, which, not for nothing, starts around age 45. There you go. Yes. So there are many different factors that could together impact the risk of Alzheimer's for women. And we know that where before we thought that Alzheimer's was a disease of old age, now we have made it clear that actually that is incorrect. Alzheimer's is a disease of midlife with symptoms that start in old age.
Oh
In
my
reality,
goodness.
yes, that's a lot of my research and other people's research. What we have shown is that Alzheimer's disease starts with negative changes in the brain years, if not decades, before cognitive symptoms become evident on clinical grounds. So what we see, we do brain scans, we do biofluids, and we've been tracking women starting in their 30s, 20s, actually, or 30s. And what we find is that around midlife, you start seeing the Alzheimer's plaques growing in women's brains, even before men's brains. And then they keep growing and growing until they reach a certain level, after which the brain is no longer able to compensate and the neurons get damaged. And that's when the symptoms emerge. But Alzheimer's is a silent disorder. that develops very slowly and progressively over time for years to decades. And we can now see that using brain scans, using other technologies. And that enabled us to look at individuals at risk in their 30s and 40s and 50s, before any symptoms become manifest, but you can detect those who are at risk for Alzheimer's because they have these lesions in their brains. And what we
Wow.
find is that this trajectory begins earlier for women than for men. This is to be confirmed. This is new research, but there seems to be an earlier onset of lesions in the brain for women that could explain the higher likelihood of developing Alzheimer's, because if you live with this for longer, right, that may make your brain more vulnerable down the line. And for some women, we are now looking into whether menopause could be a risk factor.
Is there any
Not all
research?
women, some
Right,
women.
not all women.
Yeah.
What can we do?
Well, that's so knowing your risks really speaks to treatment. And I want to be absolutely clear, risks are not determinants, right? So there are things that put you at risk relative to someone who doesn't do those things or who doesn't have those risk factors. For instance, vision loss untreated is a risk factor for Alzheimer's. Depression untreated, risk factor for Alzheimer's. High blood pressure untreated, risk factor for Alzheimer's. Air pollution is now a risk factor for Alzheimer's, So there are many different things that all compounded may put an individual at risk for Alzheimer's or not. What we are studying are all of these specifically in women, but also female-specific risk factors, like if you go through menopause earlier, if you take certain medications, if you go through pregnancy multiple times or not at all, if you go through puberty later or earlier, what are female-specific risks for Alzheimer's that we need to know about, and how do we offset the risk? So we're looking into hormone therapy actually for menopause as a potential way to reduce the risk of Alzheimer's for some women, not all women, and we don't know yet if it works or not. Just want to, except for women with oophorectomies. So in that case, it is recommended to start hormone therapy.
It's so important that there are more people like you who are doing research on these, because without research, there's really a whole lot we don't know. There's too many years of research has been dedicated on male-oriented symptoms. So before you leave, can you tell people what you're doing right now and the initiatives that you are taking to help women all over the world?
Yes, I'm so happy to talk about this actually. So I am the director of the Alzheimer's Prevention Program at Weill Cornell Medicine, New York Presbyterian, New York City. I run the Women's Brain Initiative, the Alzheimer's Prevention Clinic, and the Alzheimer's Prevention Clinical Trials Unit. But also, as of last year, I have joined Wellcome Leap, which is an independent subsidiary of the Wellcome Trust, which is one of the largest charitable organizations in the world. And I have the honor to serve as program director for CARE. CARE is my new research program. It stands for Cutting Alzheimer's Risk Through Endocrinology, CARE, CARE. We care.
Oh, wow.
And it's a $50 million program of research entirely dedicated to women's brain health and Alzheimer's prevention, specifically for women, with a really strong focus on menopause and how hormones can play a role in a woman's risk of Alzheimer's. So this works like, do you see the movie Oppenheimer?
Yes, I did.
So Oppenheimer is the first program director in that the government put aside a very large budget and picked one scientist to run the whole initiative, the Manhattan Project.
Yes.
And said, bring together some of the best scientists from all over the world so that all together you can achieve what no scientist can do alone. And we're
Wow.
working the same exact way. So in a way, I mean, I don't, not bragging on anything, but like
But you
this
should.
is like the program for menopause. I mean, I'm very proud of this that I was
You should
selected
be.
because
And I am so happy to hear about it because we need so much research to
I need
understand.
so much research. Yes.
We do. And you've already done so much, but like you said, we need to find out more,
We
right?
need to
So
find out more. And so we're now a coalition of scientists who have applied to work with us. And we have 74 scientists from all over the world, from 37 sites and institutions over every continent, and well, except Antarctica. And altogether, we are now looking at data from as high as 100 million women from all over the world. It's
wow.
effectively, I'm told, it is effectively the largest global research effort on women's brain health ever attempted. So I'm really proud.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Oh, I am so happy. You should be so proud. I'm so proud that women have, we're doing this for women.
Yes,
So thankful,
finally.
so grateful is a word. I'm so grateful that you're doing this. You're leading that initiative. Again, thank you so much for your time. And then I really highly recommend this book. There are some things that we didn't get to talk about, which is gender transition, right? And
It's
people
in
who,
there.
yeah, it's in there. If you're transitioning, you will also have menopausal challenges. And this book goes in detail to talk about that as well. So thank you so much, Dr. Mosconi. This is a great book. I'm so glad it's translated into
Me
Chinese.
too.
It's for
Me too.
everyone to read. Yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for your time. It was such a pleasure to get to talk in person.